Hello, I'm Juliet Mann, and this is the Agenda podcast, CGTN Europe's one-stop shop for smart, in-depth discussion of the issues that really matter in the world today. For decades now, Hong Kong has served as China's gateway to the world, especially in the financial sector. So as China continues opening up post-pandemic and looks to expand its businesses beyond its borders, what does the future really hold? Joining me now is Hong Kong's Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury, Christopher Hui. Absolute pleasure to have you on the agenda, sir. Now, it's been a very busy 2023 for you so far. What deals have you done?
It is indeed a very exciting 2023 because, first of all, we are entering into a new era in the post-COVID stage where we open up to the rest of the world and also to our own mainland. And at the same time, we are dealing with also uncertainties arising from geopolitics and global macroeconomic developments. But that said, I would say Hong Kong has fared rather well and also fared rather resiliently throughout this period. And personally, I've been going all out to different countries. And so far, over the past year, I've been visiting Europe, Asia, try to share with the rest of the world the success of Hong Kong as an international financial center, and also how we come about in terms of further developing our role as a connector between mainland and the rest of the world. And at the same time, we have been pushing for new developments in financial markets, in particular on the front of renminbi internationalization, with the renminbi Hong Kong dollar counters available now. Hong Kong people and global investors, basically, they can use renminbi to trade our equities. And at the same time, we are pushing for new products, including bond futures, to be listed here. And furthermore, we continue to draw capital from the rest of the world, including our latest policy to attract family offices globally to Hong Kong with the introduction of a tax concession, waiving all the profit tax chargeable on the profits obtained by single family offices. I think all these are paving the way for very exciting development here in Hong Kong and continue to be so as the country's international financial center.
You have got a very long shopping list there, and you've been on many trips and you've spoken to different sectors, different industries. I wonder which geographies, which industries do you see driving growth in Hong Kong and offering the best investment opportunities?
I think similar to the rest of the world, I can see that basically Hong Kong, similar to other international financial centers, are driven by a number of key global trends in terms of new development. I think number one global trend is about Asia, because as you can see, as the whole world going into the post-COVID era, economic growth is picking up, and definitely growth in Asia will constitute a very significant part of the global growth. And in that regard, the growth of our own country will play also a very important part. So in that case, Hong Kong being our country's national financial center, Asia is a key theme as we go about trying to promote Hong Kong and also promote our own country. And going forward, I would say growth in this part of the world is going to be a significant part of the global economic growth engine. I think number one, in terms of new trends driving Hong Kong's growth, will be growth in Asia, in particular growth in our own country. And secondly, in terms of the global forces for growth, will be arising from technology. Because after all, if you talk about new startups, new unicorns, or globally in terms of investment opportunities, people are all looking for technological themes. And in that regard, just in March this year, we revamped our main board by introducing a new chapter to our main board with companies, especially those what we call the specialist tech companies, even if they are not having revenue or profit, if they meet certain market cap criteria, we allow them to list on our main board. We are also trying to foster development in the fintech space. And this is the area where Hong Kong has been very good at, with over 800 fintech companies now operating Hong Kong, and will continue to attract more of them here.
The fintech technology, these are all things I want to talk to you about in more detail. Essentially, you're saying you're open to business. You say it's very much similar to what other countries around the world are doing. So I want to know what makes Hong Kong stand out as a financial hub. What were you doing differently?
I think the key differentiator of Hong Kong is one country, two systems. Because after all, we operate within the same country, but at the same time, we offer two systems with a rule of law, with a business environment that international investors are very akin to. I think all these point to the fact that Hong Kong is a super connector between our own country and the rest of the world. And take, for example, financial markets or our capital markets. Just over the past few months and this year, we have seen a lot of new developments. First of all, on the 1st of July last year, we had set up a ETF Connect between the ETF market here in Hong Kong and the mainland, further to the Stock Connect and also Bond Connect that we already had. And based on the ETF Connect daily turnover, you can see that just within a year, the turnover northbound, i.e. international investors using Hong Kong as a platform to buy or purchase or invest in ETFs traded in the mainland, basically has grown by more than 10 times. And for southbound, i.e. mainland investors using Hong Kong as a platform to trade or invest in the ETFs, basically the turnover has grown by 8 times. So in that regard, you can see that our role as a super connector between the capital markets of China and the rest of the world has strengthened. And that's definitely a unique differentiator. And going forward, we are going to differentiate furthermore with more products being available. I think first of all, as I introduced just now, we just in June this year, we set up renminbi counters for our stocks, i.e. investors globally in Hong Kong, they can use renminbi to buy our equities. And the next stage, in terms of work, we are going to connect these renminbi counters with the mainland liquidity pool, i.e. we are going to put these renminbi counters in southbound Stock Connect. And mainland investors with their renminbi in hands can use their renminbi direct to trade our stocks without the need to convert their renminbi into Hong Kong dollar. Because after all, the biggest source of renminbi is onshore in our own country. So by connecting this liquidity pool with our renminbi counters, this will be a significant development in terms of facilitating renminbi internationalization. And furthermore, we are going to provide more products within our renminbi ecosystem, because as the rest of the world is increasingly interested in using renminbi and also investing in renminbi, here in Hong Kong, as the country's largest offshore renminbi hub, we want to offer them with more products. And that's why we will soon launch the bond futures offshore in Hong Kong in such a way that for international investors who are investing in the mainland bond market through our Bond Connect in Hong Kong can have an additional hedging and also risk management tool available to them in the form of bond futures. And this is something that will be happening soon with our collaboration and support from the central authorities. So all in all, I would say the next key differentiator of us is basically under one country, two systems, how we facilitate and also further flow between the rest of the world and China into the renminbi. And another key differentiator of Hong Kong will be on the sustainability side, because after all, green sustainability is the global trend. But if you look at Asia per se, Hong Kong is obviously the leader in terms of sustainable finance.
Let's look beyond financial markets. I mean, how do you see Hong Kong's role developing as an intermediary between China and the rest of the world beyond money markets?
I think what you can see in Hong Kong is a very diverse culture. Like, for example, we have people from all around the world come to visit here. At the same time, many of them choose to stay here. And the reason that they choose Hong Kong is because of the international and diverse nature of this city. Like, for example, in terms of the culture scene, just very recently, in 1 year or two, we opened up 2 world-class museums. One is the Palace Museum, with the support of our own country, showcasing many of our national treasures. And the other is M+, which is a contemporary art museum. And just within this year, for example, our Palace Museum has received more than 1.3 million visitors. And all these people are drawn to Hong Kong because we showcase our national treasures in an international way, in such a way that they can use the way that they are familiar with to appreciate our own country's culture. So in that regard, you can say that the reason that people come to Hong Kong is because they feel very comfortable in the international environment, while at the same time they can get China access. So another angle to look at this is the diverse geographical nature of Hong Kong. Because even though we are international financial center, we are a commercial center, we are a very busy place, yet at the same time, a huge part of our land is our countryside. So on the one hand, you can be working in a very busy CBD. Just a few minutes later, you can be hiking up the peak in the countryside. I think all these advantages combined with the cosmopolitan nature of Hong Kong, yet combined with the nature of Hong Kong, is very unique. And basically, there's nowhere to be found but Hong Kong.
You've said that you want Hong Kong to become an international centre for green and sustainable finance. So how are you doing that?
Basically, we have been trying to push for this development across various fronts. First of all, it's through leadership in the government. Like, for example, so far, we have issued more than $22 billion equivalent of green bonds, and in multiple currencies, apart from US dollar, also in RMB and euro. And we also tokenize our green bonds with having the first ever tokenized green bond globally, try to combine green and tech. So this is something that we're very keen to do in terms of taking the lead as the government, try to facilitate the green capital market here in Hong Kong. Secondly, in terms of new development, in what we do here is with the government take the lead, we need the market to respond. And that's why we have a subsidy program, basically encouraging and incentivizing corporates and also institutions to use Hong Kong as a platform to issue green bonds here.
So how does this all tie in with your proposals to simplify that process for non-local companies to change their place of domicile to Hong Kong? I mean, what's the thinking behind that? What are the benefits? How does it all tie in?
I think this redomiciliation regime, as you highlighted, Juliet, is basically a testimony to our strength under one country, two systems. Because the reason that companies want to operate in Hong Kong is because, first of all, they have a very international environment, underpinned by rule of law, a very friendly business environment. That's number one. And number two, definitely, is the China access. They can, through Hong Kong, access the Greater Bay Area and the broader Chinese market within the same country. And that's why we need to reinforce that. And the reason that we have this redomiciliation regime is exactly to that direction, i.e. for companies who are already domiciled somewhere else, there's a very strong pull factor for them to move their companies and redomicile them to Hong Kong in such a way that they can benefit in full from the benefits that just offered under one country, two systems. That's number one. And number two, I would say, is more on the push factor in terms of why companies will choose to leave their originally domiciled jurisdictions. Because there's a global trend with trade and also increasing regulatory burden on many of these offshore jurisdictions. In fact, many of these companies who originally choose to domicile their companies in these offshore jurisdictions, they see lesser and lesser incentive to do so. So basically, they need to move their companies to places where they can have economic substance, where they can operate their business. And that's exactly where Hong Kong is. While on the one hand, they can domicile their companies here, yet at the same time benefit business-wise from opportunities here being available. And thirdly, I would say, apart from the pull factors, as I mentioned, and also the push factors I just mentioned, is the wealth of professional services being made available in Hong Kong. Because here in Hong Kong, within an hour, you can see your lawyers, accountants, surveyors, whoever, professionals, you can see them face to face. It's very unique globally, where you can have all the professionals gather in one place within minutes, because we have such a wealth of expertise and professional services available here. So by redomiciling your companies here and also setting up your companies here, this reach of professional services will be at your doorstep to service you now and going forward.
Christopher, crypto is a policy direction that you have been developing. How is Hong Kong making its comeback as a crypto hub?
I think we should see this in a broader light, not just for crypto, but virtual asset more broadly. Because after all, you talk about virtual asset, people look at this not just as a technology. They look at this because of the technological benefits that we will bring to the real economy. Like, for example, through blockchain, you're going to disintermediate many of the intermediaries, at the same time reducing a lot of transaction cost and friction in many of these financial transactions. Like, for example, I just mentioned earlier, we tokenize our green bonds, the government green bonds, which is the first ever government green bonds being tokenized globally. And we tokenize a one-year green bond, and the experience that we had is that the settlement period for that green bond actually can reduce from the originally 5 days to 1 day, attributed to technology, i.e. blockchain being available. So we can actually see through technology and also look at the actual benefits that this technology will bring to the economic efficiency and also reducing economic system friction in terms of facilitating transactions. That's number one. And number two, in terms of the regulation that we have in place, basically what we do here is reflecting an emerging global consensus, i.e. virtual asset is going to stay, yet at the same time, we should regulate well because there are risks. That's why we will look at the risk per se to see the nature of the risk. If the risk is similar in terms of nature to what you see in the conventional mainstream finance, we should subject them to a similar regulation. So the overall principle is similar business, similar risk, we subject them to similar regulation. That's exactly against this backdrop that we have a new regime basically in place since June this year to regulate the virtual asset exchanges. And we built into our regime regulations to protect investors. Like, for example, the investors' assets have to be segregated, separate from those of the exchanges. At the same time, there have been arrangements in place to avoid conflict of interest, i.e. the exchange operator cannot involve in trading on their own exchange, which they operate, in order to reduce the conflict of interest. I think all of these point to the fact that we have a holistic regulatory regime taking into account of financial stability and also investor protection, yet at the same time reflecting a global consensus, which is to regulate this sector holistically. Yeah. So with these, I would say that we are on a solid footing to ensure that this sector is well regulated and also be able to grow in a sustainable manner.
You talk about regulation, you say you've got this holistic approach, whereas places like Singapore and other jurisdictions, they're tightening regulations. Yours is, I suppose, more of a macro approach to it. So what's new, I suppose, is that retail investors are going to come under that regulatory framework. So why are you doing that? How's it going to work?
As I said earlier, virtual assets is going to stay. And also, while we acknowledge the risk involved, as you said, because of the anonymous nature of these transactions, there could be risk in terms of money laundering, risk in terms of having terrorist financing. So we need to regulate this sector well. So there's against this backdrop that we have a holistic regulatory regime in place, as I said earlier, taking into account not just on the payment side, not just on the anti-money laundering side, but also on the financial stability and also investor protection. Because if you look at the lessons that we learned from previous failed cases, it's not because of virtual asset per se, but rather because of the underlying problems these exchanges encounter in terms of fraud, in terms of various types of irregularities. And that's exactly what we want to deal with in terms of having a regime in place, try to address this issue, and at the same time regulate this sector in a holistic manner. That's number one. And number two, I would say, even though retail are being allowed, we have put in several safeguards and also guardrails in order to ensure that the retail investors are being protected. Like, for example, for the products they are able to trade, they have to meet certain criteria. Yet at the same time, for the investors per se, they also have to meet certain criteria because they're allowed to do so. All these safeguards or guardrails are meant to ensure that investor protection are there when they're involved in the trading of such virtual asset products. That's number two. And number three, I would say, what you point to is the importance of investor education. Because after all, this is an emerging new market, and many of these involve new intricacies. So we need to let the market know, in particular investors know, what are they going into in order for them to make the right choice for themselves, taking into account the different investment or risk appetite that they have. And that's exactly what we have been doing, will continue to do in terms of strengthening investor protection in such a way that our investors will know what they're going into when they involve in these activities.
Now, one of the pilot schemes that you've rolled out, you've already talked about tokenizing green bonds. Another one is the EHKD, the central bank's digital currency. I wonder how you see crypto, digital currencies fitting into mainstream finance?
As I discussed earlier, I think you can see that even though these kind of new activity or new finance areas, originally they starting outside of mainstream finance, the risks that they pose are very similar. And that's why now we are subject them to similar regulation in the mainstream finance, because after all, the risks are very much alike. That's number one. Specifically, for example, as I said earlier, in terms of regulation of our virtual asset exchanges, we require them to have sufficient financial resources before they can operate the exchanges. At the same time, the investors themselves, they have to meet certain criteria before they can trade these products being listed. And also at the same time, the client's asset have to be segregated from those of the exchanges. And all these safeguards and guardrails are meant to protect our investors and to ensure that the exchanges can will not undermine the financial stability that this market provides. That's number two. And thirdly, I would say, in terms of how this whole market is going to develop, I would say that we are going to ensure that there is sufficient holistic regulation in place in such a way that this market can grow in a sustainable manner. And that's why next year, we will also put in the regulation for stable coins, where we have the fiat currency as underlined. Because as you can see that in terms of trend going forward, a lot of the real world assets are being tokenized, like what we did with our tokenized green bonds. And going forward, there could be fiat money, for example, having a technological or tokenized form like stable coins. So in such a way that we need to regulate them to ensure that they are well regulated. And this is something that we're going to do next year. And going forward, I would say, in terms of how we are going to grow or also to ensure the sustainable market development, we need the market, in particular investors, to be in the know in terms of what they're going into. And that's why investor education is so important. And point to another question that you have is regarding the central bank digital currency. Yeah. While on one hand, they are also one type of virtual assets in the sense that they are a type of technological and also a electronic payment. Yet at the same time, I can see it developing several dimensions. First of all, is locally in Hong Kong. We are developing our electronic or e-Hong Kong dollar, and now we are having pilot cases locally. And another dimension is more regional in terms of how we interact with our own country. And that's why we have been conducting various type of pilot cases with our own country's central bank, i.e. having cross-boundary usage or also use cases of renminbi. And finally, apart from the local level and also regionally with our own country, will be more at a more global level or regional level in terms of the central bank digital currency. And that's why we have a project, what we call mBridge. Basically, is working together with central banks, not just in Hong Kong, in the mainland, but also central banks in Thailand and also Saudi Arabia, in such a way that we can have CBDC, so to speak, being used as the settlement currency for cross-boundary or cross-border trade settlement across these jurisdictions. So it is, again, a form of digital currency, yet at the same time, it is now meant for institutional level to settle trade among these jurisdictions. So broadly speaking, we have a local version, we have a version of our own country, and also have a regional version, basically to facilitate development in this area.
We've talked a lot in detail about the nuts and bolts of Hong Kong's economy, where you see the engines of growth. But I'd like your take on what's going outside, because I know you have an eye on what's happening in the rest of the world. Real economic squeeze, cost of living crisis, high inflation, crazy interest rates. What's your outlook for the global economy?
As you said, I think we are going into a rather uncertain world because, first of all, with the rapid rise in interest rate in the US, a lot of assets are being revalued. And also at the same time, a lot of jurisdictions are undergoing their own problems in terms of inflation. But that said, I would say we are very lucky in Hong Kong, where we have a rather subdued inflation rate of around 2%. And also at the same time, our unemployment rate is only around 3%. So we are rather separate from the rest of the world in terms of having these troubles. And at the same time, I would say in terms of what new trends or global trends that there are going to be, I think there are three. I think number one is about diversification, because after all, as you look at the world, people are looking for ways to diversify their investment or diversify their assets. because with the rapid rise in the US interest rate, many of the currencies against US dollar has been affected in terms of valuation. So they are looking into ways to diversify their assets into other currencies than US dollar. And renminbi is definitely one of the choices being made available. And that's why in June this year, we have dual counter for people, especially international investors, to trade our stocks in both Hong Kong dollar and renminbi. And also in the next step, we are going to connect these renminbi counters with the huge liquidity pool in the mainland, i.e. for Stock Connect southbound, mainland investors can use renminbi direct to trade our stocks. So I think all these point to the fact that Hong Kong is increasingly seen to be the place where people can diversify their assets and diversify their investments, and also using renminbi as a means to invest. That's number one in terms of diversification. And secondly, in terms of new global development, will be about another D, apart from diversification, is about decarbonization. Because after all, I think green is going to be an eternal theme across jurisdictions, across companies. At the same time, our own country has our own target to achieve carbon neutrality by the year 2060. And Hong Kong as a city, a part of China, we have our own goal to achieve carbon neutrality by the year 2050. So all these point to the need for more projects, more investments needed to ensure that we can have these green transformation. So in that regard, there will be a huge demand for green finance. And also there will be new developments in terms of how Hong Kong can be used as a platform to fundraise in order to support these new developments. And also at the same time now, green finance is not talking about just new projects, but also transition finance in terms of how we can transition the existing economic activities, not just new projects, into green projects. So this points to a huge demand for financial incentives and also huge demand for financial assets, which are going to convert money into green investment opportunities. And Hong Kong is uniquely placed to do that because after all, we are already the leading green finance center in the rest of the world. And also we have very established platforms, including a bond platform and also ETF platform to grow and also to list and also to develop these products. That's the second trend that was observed in terms of decarbonization. The third trend, I would say, is another D, not about diversification, not about decarbonization, it's about digitalization. Because as technology develops, many industries or many old industries are acquiring new technologies to improve their efficiencies. And all at the same time in the financial world, increasingly more real-world assets are being tokenized, as I highlighted, including stable coins regulation that we're going to put together next year. And also we have tokenized our green bonds. And also digitalization is also a theme that is going to be very prevalent across corporates, where people and companies are using technology to reduce inefficiency, inconvenience, and also enhance customer experience.
Christopher Hui, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find more agenda content on CGTN Europe's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube channels. Until next time, goodbye.
The most interesting questions.
Are there other living beings beyond Earth?
Will man or machine be in charge?
Great question.
Always have more than one answer.
Well, hold on, let me just draw up a list.
And always come from more than one person.
That's where the credibility lies.
The concept of having a machinery which is alive and evolving didn't wait for us.
The end of inequality of incomes and wealth around the world, can you imagine how difficult that is at the moment to achieve?
Every episode, Stephen Cole, Murray Beveridge, and some of the brightest minds out there shed light on the answers to some of the most intriguing questions.
There are two ways of looking at this.
Machines can't really discriminate between civilian and military targets.
The Answers Project.
Maybe we need to just look at this in a bit more detail.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
The Answers Project, a new podcast from CGTN Europe.